And so with that, the idea is that to have these sorts of technologies actually work and to have them take root, it's critical to have venture capital partners to do that. Funding and capital is absolutely imperative. And we have two leaders from the ecosystem to join us today. Bill Taranto from the Merck Global Innovation Fund and Doug Lee from Bayer Pharmaceuticals, who is the Vice President of Business Development and Licensing, both who are very active in the digital health ecosystem today and finding the next truly globally diffusive digital health technologies that can improve human healthcare and human rights all over the world. Bill and Doug, thank you for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to hearing your conversation.
Thanks so much. Doug, great to see you again. I'm glad we finally got to get this scheduled. I know we missed last month, but great to be here with you. I always like to start this out, Doug. We have a pretty vast audience of everything from students to entrepreneurs and investors. For those that don't know you, I kind of want, if you could tell us a little about your journey, a little about your career and how you ultimately ended up at Bayer and what a bit of your role is at Bayer today.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's great to be on. Thank you, Bill, and thanks, Dan, for having me. So my name's Doug Lee. I'm with Bayer in the pharma division, in the business development group in particular. And my role there is to really look after the digital and data science category globally. So I've been here about a little less than 2 years. I came from Samsung, where I led strategy and corp dev in the healthcare group. And my journey through the space, I've been 25 years plus in healthcare and technology, really in the business and finance side. So I've been started out as a banker, moved to the venture side, and then I've been at big and small companies. So I've seen patterns of scale, lived off the fat of the earth, et cetera. So good rounded experience, I guess.
Fantastic. That's great. So let's talk a little specifically about Bayer and what do you do really as it relates to digital and data science? What does that entail? And how does that role interact with the broader Bayer?
Yeah. So in the pharma division, we're one of the main divisions at Bayer. We really focus on three sets of opportunities. So one is, all the digital activities that are attached to the pipeline. So that could be preclinical to registration to beyond, sort of at the front end, machine learning and computational bio for looking at hits and leads for compounds. It can be real world data, looking at super responders for things, or even precision medicine, looking at digital biomarkers. At the clinical stage, it's normally has to do with synthetic trials, and using that as a way forward, especially for drugs where there are no RCTs available for that. And then just taking the RWD stuff and moving to the evidence generation side for health economic reasons, going to payers before we have coverage, et cetera. So that's kind of one set of opportunities, which is really attached to the core of Bayer. The second set would be really technologies attached to our medicines. And that can be a point solution. It can be a holistic solution, normally a digital app of sorts. That really the idea is to bring people into our patient journeys, into our brands and our business. And then the third category, which is detached from the pipeline, which is independent digital revenue opportunities. And these are Livongo-esque type things where we're looking at modern product development, really slick user experience, et cetera, incorporating some real world data and really trying to apply the therapeutic standards that we would normally have in pharma to that device solution to try to make it a go. So it's a broad swath of a lot of things.
Great. You mentioned Livongo. Can you talk a little about your most recent investments that you've done, and what's the thinking behind why you did them? And also, for full transparency, Doug and I have a pretty good history together of investing in some of the same companies. So we actually do have a couple of the same investments right now, but he may cover a couple of them. But really interested in just kind of some of the investments you did, but what's the thinking behind why Bayer did it and what you hope to get out of it?
Well, I think just big picture, I think, this category is evolving very quickly. And, we can't do it all ourselves. So we're really trying to basically work with experts and work with all the people who are building, this category, really sort of at the front end, really the basics. So how do you create this patient engagement platform? How do you monetize and create insights? And then, how do you pull these platforms together? I mean, that's really what we're trying to do. That's really a fragmented space, but that's, sort of the opportunity. So we dabble in the areas where we think are aligned to the business. So we did, speaking of Livongo, we with you, Bill, we funded Transcarent, which is Glenn Tolman's next act. He was the CEO. We think he's the best CEO in the sector. And he's created basically a digital offering for self-employed insurers. So that's kind of one. We did a platform deal, a digital health platform deal with a company called OneDrop. And there the idea is to develop basically digital solutions in our core therapeutic category. So women's health, oncology, cardiovascular, really on top of that platform. So that was more of I'd say a platform play. Behavioral health is an interesting area aside from data science. So we're looking at the mental health space pretty actively. We invest in a company called Brightline. And that team there is focused on solutions for kids. The leader of that company was also a byproduct of Livongo, their CEO. So she was a chief growth officer there. So we felt she had good experience. And today, I think we just announced one, which is it's called Zarago Health. And basically, that's they're trying to develop a Livongo-esque solution in the dermatology space based on a phototherapy device that has been cleared. So we do things like that. That's all what I would say in that third bucket that we talked about before, these integrated care solutions, virtual care, Livongo type things. We're pretty active on the other side, on the computational bio and AI side. We did an investment in a company called Recursion. And that's a AI guided drug discovery platform where they can use that platform to basically screen our compound library. And we're looking for specific therapies in the fibrotic space. So hearts, lungs, kidneys, etc.
Great. So one kind of side question I have for you, just kind of related to your role. What's the role of business development in what you do? Is when you make these investments, is the thought that this might be a potential M&A opportunity for Bayer, or are these more about making sure these assets exist in the world and then you guys get the advantage of working with them and learning, or is it kind of a combination of both those things?
It's a combination. I mean, it really varies by stage, the investing side. Sometimes it's at the very earliest side. Sometimes it's a doc with a patent just trying to get his company going and that idea going. So sometimes it starts out as sponsored research into a new co, etc. Sometimes it's an early investment, maybe the A/B round, where we like to be with top investors like you, Bill, learning the category and really having, I would say, the best thinking on a particular problem, because all these problems are getting resolved right now. Other times we take an equity investment to align the partnership to make sure that, because as a shareholder, it's very different from being a development partner and commercialization partner. And then sometimes it's an equity investment with the prelude to a potential M&A down the road as a category develops. So, it's really just really situation specific.
Okay, good. And what do you think the role of farm? Obviously, I'm with Merck and you're with Bayer, and we've obviously done investments together. But what do you think ultimately the role of pharma is? Do you think that, it's for us to really drive digital health, or just be an active participant? What do you think ultimately our role is in pushing this forward? Of course, a lot gets talked around like DTX and what our role in that is, but it's really just more broadly. What you think pharma's role is in digital health and how we, progress that role forward.
Yeah, I this is an evolving position, but my basic position is that the tech ecosystem should be developed by the technology companies. So I don't think we're the convener, quote unquote, of the platforms where we're pulling all that together and the participants. I think we're a facilitator of those platforms. And in particular, the things that we facilitate is, we bring our value chain or our ecosystem or components of our ecosystem onto those platforms. And I think the most valuable pieces that we can bring are the two hard spots in the model for a lot of the smaller companies, which is getting integrated into the workflow and getting the incentive structure right for digital health. And so, yeah, we try to bring our resources into that and get these technologies sort of at the front line of healthcare.
Yeah, fantastic. We're very similar in thinking, which is fantastic. I'm curious, for all the entrepreneurs that are out there, how, when you think about digital health, what do you see as some of the growing areas? I think the clinical development side, and where you mentioned AI is playing a role in clinical development, I think is one of the fastest growing areas. But just curious what you see in digital health from your perspective as an investor of some of the, maybe faster or bigger growing areas within digital health.
Yeah, I think, so I think the AI computational biospace is definitely a big one. All this, keeping things on the R&D side as in silico as long as possible. It's just more efficient, and you just can't do that level of throughput manually. Okay, there's some things that you can automate. So there's all those software tools for that. The interesting aspect of the software is that a lot of these softwares can generate assets, right? So compounds. So a lot of deals that traditionally would have been a service procurement deal, on the software side, are now expanded sort of in the business development sense because these platforms are generating assets. So then they become a traditional BD&L aspect. So I think that's one exciting area. I think the other thing is just basic digital with the smartphone and having the feedback loop. I mean, that feedback loop didn't exist, before all this digital technology came into fray. So that's creating things like these decentralized clinical trials, going to patients where they are, making things more convenient, collecting data that you couldn't before. And I think with COVID and just seeing all the data needs that came up with the vaccine development and how quickly that had to come together with this dispersed population, I think that really validated that. And then I think this whole precision engagement, just not just with the patient, but with the HCP, because the HCPs need to evolve as the patient journey is evolving. So making sure that feedback loop is very active and current and timely, so that there's good interventions right away. I think that's just closing that loop off.
Good. I know we only have a few more minutes, so I have two last questions. The first one is, this whole conference today is about sort of health and human rights, and just wondering how you kind of think about things like social determinants of health or investing more globally in developing countries, where sometimes they don't have access to health, and in some cases their human rights are violated. And just how do you think it as an investor about doing those types of investments, on a much more global basis?
Yeah. So the way I think about that, Bill, is we the company really tucks all of that into diversity and inclusion, right, and sustainability. So and that sort of cuts across the whole corporation. So at the management level at Bayer, we're trying to have a gender balance. So we have specific targets to have equality over time. So that's one aspect. In terms of clinical trial development, in terms of how we put protocols together, we want to make sure that the diversity of that pool reflects the communities that we serve. Right. And then for market access, just making sure that we can deliver our medicines to vulnerable populations.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So last question, Stan, I'm going to ask one more question. It's just for the broad audience that's out there and they want to work with Bayer, how should they think about working with your organization, you specifically, about whether they're entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, or they're investors? How should they interact with you, in your role at Bayer?
Yeah, I think like you, Bill, we get plenty of inbound, and we go out there and search for candidates too. But I think the hardest spot in the model, okay, is synergy. People can come to us, we can assess a management team, we can value companies, we can look at strategy, but at the end of the day, the most coveted aspect in the analysis, that gets things through is what is the synergy and how can we help? So I think for the entrepreneur, if they come doing their homework and saying, this is how we think you can help us accelerate our business. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Doug, I want to say thank you for your time today. It's always a pleasure talking with you. And Stan, I want to thank you for inviting both of us today. It's always great fun to talk to your audience. Thank you.
Okay.
Bill and Doug, greatly appreciated. We know how busy you both are and how just crazy these days are with the endemic now ensuing the model. So thank you both.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And it is critical, I think, from an understanding of the audience and just people listening to understand that again, if you look about the medical innovation process and how it diffuses globally, it really is critical that to look way upstream. And the digital health investments that are being made today are the ones that are going to form the digital health, human rights efforts, and health equity efforts tomorrow. So having an eye on how these models are developing in some of the higher resource nations today and trying to look at them and look at the opportunities for alignment and actually deployment and implementation in the lowest resourced 100 nations and really some of the lowest resourced 1 billion people is critical, because the more thinking we do ahead of time, the more planning we can execute, and the more we can facilitate a frictionless or at least a less frictional implementation plan.